Okay? Now, physicians we don't operate without, you got to have docs. That's key. And I can't imagine any organization, I know through all of this process, they are evaluating, okay, and there is a shortage of providers. So, Mark, I'll let you,
No, I appreciate that. And, I think also what you're asking is in regards to timelines, because if I'm a physician right now practicing in Independence and I see an uncertain future and there are other opportunities to go and practice, where's the certainty? And it's going to be very difficult to retain, let alone attract and recruit new physicians in an uncertain environment. So we're working very hard on completing our financial due diligence of all these different service lines and the opportunities that are in front of us. We're expecting to have a report to our Finance Committee by the 22nd of June. And then I know the Mercy Board actually meets later, mid-June, and our board meets at the end of June as we're working on what we call the letter of intent. I think if we can, by the end of the summer, solidify a letter of intent, there's still going to be a lot of due diligence and some other work and things that have to be done, but it helps provide some stability and some certainty as we're starting to retain and recruit providers. So my ask would be that folks just to hang in there with us. We're working very hard as quickly as we can. We understand the environment that they're in. Obviously, for my philosophy, we want to be a best place to work. We want physicians and patients to feel comfortable and secure, and we're working very hard to do that.
I might mention also, as everybody knows, we had Dr. Sohai, OB, here in Independence. Dr. Sohai was a phenomenal provider, had an incredibly large practice. Just over this past 5 weeks, as Dr. Sohai is now leaving, we have quickly turned around and signed a lease agreement with Coffeyville for them to establish an OB practice, okay, here in Independence, and it's their intent to staff that quickly. So we are understanding these shortages of physicians, and those Mercy lost two of our surgeons, and we lost Dr. Sohai. Those 3 positions were a significant loss and have had a significant impact on us at the hospital. It trickles all the way down to lab, imaging, all of those areas. So those are some areas that have to get shored up pretty quickly. And what I had noticed, okay, the discernment process has gone on over a year. My comments on up above me, okay, in this organization is that in the past 2 or 3 months, this deterioration has accelerated, and that's why timing is of the essence. And we are moving very quickly because we can't, we've got to retain these coworkers and these doctors, and that's why timing is really important. We feel it every day on both sides of the equation. Yes, sir.
As Coffeyville's city owns the hospital facilities,
yes, sir.
Would you envision that Independence City possibly would own the facilities here in a merger?
Yeah, let me address that. So as part of the letter of intent, one of the things that we're working our way through, Mercy is wanting to do, when I said earlier, we want to make sure that when this is all said and done, that the city leaders, both in Independence and in Coffeyville, are supportive of what's being recommended. Mercy is willing to donate these assets and the net book value remaining on these assets to somebody. Our initial intent is that we are willing to donate these assets to the City of Independence, and they then could potentially have a lease arrangement with Coffeyville, or we could donate them to the CRMC, okay? And then you start talking about service level commitments, and you start talking about governance, okay, which really become the important items for the community. So the whole who's going to own the assets is something that we are still working closely with the city leaders to determine what is the best long-term to sustain it, okay, in this community. So that question is still an open question, okay, but it is something that is up for discussion at this point. Would you say anything different, Neil? Or?
No, I thought it was on.
I think, yeah, as long as you're talking into it, I think it'll go.
Okay.
I think.
That's a difficult decision, a difficult thing to work through. The assets, as Kim mentioned, some of the buildings need to be tore down. Some of the buildings, and when you do that, then you've got to rehab the front entrance and do some things there. So there's some expense involved in that, obviously, from the board perspective of the new board or whatever. we want to be able to be sure that we have access to the assets. We don't want a 5-year lease. If we do it, it's got to be a 99-year lease, or we need to own it so that we have control over the buildings, have control over how we fix them up and maintain them in the future. And I won't take credit for it. I think the boards and the previous boards to the one that I'm on in Coffeyville have done a great job at CRMC in keeping the facilities up and adding to them as they needed to, and I would anticipate they would do the same thing here.
There is significant thinking going on both sides of the equation to try to find the best solution here on that piece. Other questions?
Oh, well, and I was just going to add, I mean, if I had my druthers, as my track coach would say, I think to Neil's point, if it's a lease arrangement, it has to be long-term, or it's very difficult to start thinking strategically about the things that we want to do together. Because if we have this cloud hanging over our head of, well, within 5 years, we might not be in the building anymore. So when we start talking about $10 million investments in cancer treatment centers and investments that we think are in the best long-term interest of the community, and then there's that possibility that that goes away, it's very difficult to strategically start aligning ourselves. And I know it's one of those things where you have to hold hands and jump off the cliff together. You have to learn to let go of that life rope to swim to shore. But you've got to let go, in my view, of the life rope because we want to do this together. And if you have that hanging over the back in our minds, it's just cleaner probably to have the donated assets to the organization in Coffeyville rather than city. I think you get the solidification of having independence representation on the board. We know that we're going to be doing these town hall meetings and community needs assessments, and there's many, many opportunities to be engaged in the community for feedback, for strategic planning. So I don't know if it should be a make or break if the assets go one way or the other because we're open-minded. But I just think it's cleaner long run and strategically if the assets do go to CRMC.
You know, and I might just say, so when you look at the location of these two facilities, one of the questions, the first question I got here, and one of the biggest questions in bringing together this whole transaction, and the people in the community that have asked me is, okay, so CRMC now, this is a new entity. Everybody wants to know what level of services are going to be done here. That's what people want to know. And in talking with city leaders, that's what they keep saying. I just need to be able to make sure that the people here in this community feel like their clinical needs are being met, okay? So as this arrangement is being structured, and you talk about governance, those are all the things that there is a trust that's going to have to be there that this new board is going to be considering. Because if this new entity doesn't make sure that the level of clinical services that are being provided in Independence and this town or community doesn't feel that their needs are being met, they are not going to support it. And what's really important, because when I was president of the Central Region, I'd come down here, all I ever heard about was this rivalry between these two communities. I happen to believe, though, as I've continued to dig deeper into this, a lot of that is going away, and the new leaders are understanding this importance. But the water historically doesn't flow that direction. And if this new entity doesn't make sure that there's a certain level of services that are provided here and this community doesn't agree with it or like it, they're not going to support what's going on here. And so this board's going to have to make sure that those needs are being met. That's why their activity, their participation, Mark's participation in this community and the Coffeyville, these are all going to be really important items going forward. And the community leaders on both sides are going to have to embrace this new way of thinking about healthcare now in Southeast Kansas as more of a system and a regional health system, not Coffeyville or not Independence. And it's going to take community leaders and business leaders to grab that concept to make it work. Because historically, that hasn't necessarily always been the easiest thing to think about. So, I won't say any more. Any other? Yes, ma'am, in the back.
Well, I was here in 1987, and I was a very healthy person about 5 years ago when I was diagnosed with cancer. And if it wasn't for the incredibly lucky town we had to have a we don't have to drive to them. Wonderful nurses. I have to go every 3 months for an MRI and an echocardiogram, and I can have them right here in Independence. I don't have to go to Wichita.
Right.
When I had to have my chemo and radiation, I could have my chemo here, and I had my radiation in Coffeyville, so there we were, working together again.
Right.
Unfortunately, probably everybody in this room will be affected through a family member, themselves, or somebody from knowing somebody that's had cancer.
Right.
And I just hope and pray that we can make this work for not only me, but the many, many cancer patients that we have right now here in this town. Every day, when I go down there, there's somebody new that they're starting to treat, that we have the opportunity to be able to stay here.
Right.
A lot of people I know that have cancer can't afford to go out of town. It's just been absolutely wonderful that I've been able to have the support of my community during this treatment.
You know, and that was part of the reasons that, you know, one of the last slide that Neil talked about, where we actually listed the services that most likely or preliminarily were being considered that would obviously be in this community. And it's, guys, it's virtually everything that we're doing here, except for potentially, as Mark indicated, acute care inpatient services is one that we run 8 inpatients a day. They run 18, 20, something in their acute. And the inefficiency of staffing an 8-bed unit, it just doesn't work. And let me mention one other thing. When we talked to all of our physicians, when I first got down here, each one of our doctors came into my office separately and said, I just want you to know this is what I want. I don't want to do inpatient care anymore. And guys, it is really unusual that in a hospital like this, that doctors doing primary care, family practice, internal medicine doctors, see you in the office and then go see you over in the hospital when you're admitted. Most doctors in the country have now moved away to a hospitalist program. They want to be in the office every single day. They send them to the hospital, they have a hospitalist, and that's who takes care of them, and then they hand them off back. And that's where our doctors want. CRMC is in the process of putting in place a hospitalist program. So all of these things start making a lot of sense of how you bring these two organizations together and they start working more effectively. And to be honest with you, probably 95% of all the things you've ever gotten in the past from a patient contact for care will probably continue to be done in this community.
And thank you for sharing your story regarding the cancer. My mother passed away from cancer. We're with you.
Next, yes, ma'am.
What happens to the large investment that's been made in the electronic medical record here with the Epic system? And I think Coffeyville's still with
Meditech. Yeah, that is an area of discussion that has to be figured out. That is something that this new entity is going to have to solve. Do we take Meditech over to Independence, or we take Epic over to CRMC? And that evaluation is going on. I can tell you also, Mercy is also wanting to do services for this new entity. And so we are also, as we go down this path, putting in proposals to it. But those are big decisions that have to get made yet. Yes, sir.
Are you saying that you're going to wind up with legal structure with equal representation from Independence and Coffeyville and at an early date?
What I'm not saying is that it will be equal. I don't know that. So I can't sit here and say that today. What I do know is that as we continue to go through this discussion, the governance is still yet to be sorted through as part of the letter of intent. So we're working on.
So you don't know at this point?
I don't have an answer. I can't sit here and give you an answer today, otherwise I would. It's still up for, we're discussing what is necessary so that various communities feel that they are properly represented, and that's, okay, in order to make sure that their interests are being met. But we don't have that answer yet. Yes, sir.
if acute care were to be in Coffeyville, everybody knows an ambulance ride anywhere is very, very expensive. Is anything going to be done to address that for independent residents?
Yeah, I had that question yesterday, and that's something that they're going to have to, you may have an answer to that. I didn't have an answer yesterday, but it's something that has to be solved, because you can't have an ambulance ride every time somebody has to be admitted.
Well, and I think I've had some great discussions with local EMS folks, and everywhere I've always been, this is an important issue, and we need to figure out a way to coordinate. We need to make sure we're all working together. We need to be thinking maybe even outside the box. For example, maybe instead of a traditional ambulance, we also can set up some sort of a service where it's not an emergency. We're trying to prevent maybe a necessary trip to the emergency room. If you have an asthma patient, say a discount patient or uninsured patient who's living at home and they feel like they can't breathe, they're going to call up the ambulance. Now, that's an expensive run. We're looking at figuring out ways that maybe we can work with the community in a separate type of a program where maybe they have an opportunity to go out and visit and figure out, well, let's figure out a way to get their air conditioning turned back on. If they're afraid that the electric bills are too high and they're not running their AC, we've got to figure that out. That's a cheaper way to take care of the patient in their home rather than calling an ambulance to come out and bring them into the emergency room for admission. It's going to cost us a fortune if we just could figure out a way to turn the AC on to prevent them from going into an acute medical need. So there's ways I think that we can think outside of the traditions of what our ambulance services do and how we can coordinate with our communities and with our patients that really need us. But that is a lifeline for many patients. So for those that are true emergencies, we have to make sure we have that service available. But maybe they're also being called out into the field, depleting resources that could be going elsewhere if there's a more effective solution for everybody.
Yes, sir. I'll come back to you, Metcalf.
Throughout the years, whenever Mercy was needing an expansion or everything, they came to the community for fundraisers. And so It's been a partnership over the years. I moved back to my hometown in '96, and it was the capital campaign called Foundation for the Future, in which they asked for $2.5 million from independents, a part of, I think, maybe a $6 or $8 million campaign. And it was successful. I think it was over $1 million. I don't think it was a 2.5 million, but it was a significant amount of money that the local community did contribute.
Yes, sir.
Now, and we created a wonderful, how many bed facility do we have on top that was built on top of the?
Yeah, and Len, how many beds do we have upstairs on the second? 40.
40 beds. Now, I've been thinking about how that might be somehow figured into the formula. Could it be obviously a rehabilitation center?
Correct.
Or could it be a elder care center? Or
Right.
We have two great operations and businesses in this area, Windsor Place and Medical Lodges.
Yes, sir.
Something between the collaborating to find out so that wonderful facility that was constructed with local money can be utilized.
Yeah, two things. First of all, as it relates to foundation and donated monies in the past, Mercy is very, very sensitive to that piece. And always in these kind of a transaction, those monies through these kind of transactions do stay local. Those monies go nowhere. They stay right here. Okay, so you won't see any of that money moving elsewhere or being given away to somebody else. It will stay here for the use in this community. Your comment about how the current beds or the facilities get used, when Mark was laying out that potential continuum and you saw there is benefit in rehab beds and those type of things because,